Hello and welcome to today's episode of Builders. We're thrilled to welcome Karin Håkansson, Head of Data at Adapteo Group, to the podcast. Karin has extensive experience in driving data strategies and empowering organizations to make data-driven decisions. At Adapteo, she plays a crucial role in leveraging data to support business growth and operational efficiency. Today, we'll dive into topics like data management, hiring in data, and the challenges of executing effective data strategies in real-world business environments. Karin, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Let's dive in, shall we? To start, could you give us a brief overview of your background, what led you to specialize in data, and how you ended up as head of data at Adapteo Group?
Yes, sure. Well, I checked my CV like a couple of weeks ago, and I realized I've been working with data for 20 years now. So
oh wow,
it's a long time. But I have been working in many different roles. So I started out on the business side, actually in manufacturing. But there It was more from like, okay, so we need to measure KPIs sort of. And then I moved more into the technical part. So I became a software engineer and then a data engineer and then an analyst and then a manager for different data teams. And then I moved into data governance. And then eventually I ended up here as head of data. But data has always been my true passion, I would say.
So you've kind of progressed through a lot of the different roles within the field, essentially, right?
Yes, and it's always been sort of like I always wanted to sort of solve data, right? So that has always been my topic, but I've always tried it from like different roles.
Is it solvable?
Yeah, that's the problem, right? So are we going to be able to solve data? Yeah, that's my mission, right? So
yeah. And let's talk a little bit about the company, about your role as well, because Adapteo operates in a fairly unique space. It's providing adaptable buildings and smart infrastructure solutions, right? And there's this, it's a fairly strong anticipated growth in the industry, in the modular construction market over the coming years. Tell us a bit about what the company does exactly.
Yeah, so we have these temporary building solutions, or modules, as we call them, and so we rent it out. For example, if a school needs to renovate, and the kids they need to go somewhere while their school is being renovated, so then we bring on this, and we are able to put it up quite quickly, and so we solve that sort of problems, because it's also like. One of those things that life happens, right? So there was one case where a school burnt down, and the kids need to go to school pretty fast. So then we're pretty fast on putting it up instead of having a permanent building there. So that's what we do.
And how quickly can these kind of buildings be put up? Obviously, it depends on the size.
It depends on the size, but I would say like I would say like a school, then like a month or 1 to 2 months, we could definitely be up and running. So
yeah, and is it then these kind of like schools? Is this the kind of main product, or rather, how can you elaborate on like Adapteo's role within the industry and what differentiates it maybe from its competitors?
Well, I think one of the things that like differentiates is that we are very sustainable, right? So it's a very sustainable. The business model itself is sustainable, right? Because we have these modules, we sort of put them up together, and you have a building in pretty fast, and then we bring them down, and then we renovate them, and then we rent them out again. So we don't really we don't throw away the modules. We use them again and again and again and again. So I think that's sort of like how we really, and that's what the world needs right now, right? Sustainable solutions. So I think that's how we really differentiates from our competitors, I would say.
Yeah, and is this then seen as a real kind of alternative to permanent construction, or is it kind of a maybe a kind of temporary solution? Because you were talking about if the school's being renovated, for example, the kind of Adapteo's solutions are kind of, it makes it sound more like a temporary solution, but I can assume that they're also seen as like an alternative to permanent construction, right?
Yes, they are, of course, because I mean they have the same sort of I mean, you still need to have the same standard for the kids that go there, right? So it
Exactly.
is the same standard as a house, but what's good is that you can actually move it when your need changes, right? So that's the but then again, of course, it's not the permanent building but it stands there for as many years as a permanent building does, of course. So there are some differences, but the standard is the same, I would say.
And you were talking a little bit about the sustainability aspect, of course, and how that's a key kind of differentiator. I was also seen on your website, also in other areas too, how the company highlights that its adaptable buildings can generate 96% lower carbon emissions compared to permanent construction, and that you were talking about kind of recycling what's been used before as well. How does data help you track and validate and kind of optimize these sustainability metrics?
Well, that's the key, right? How else will you know if you are sustainable or not? So of course, data is a key in order to know if you are sustainable or not. So that's definitely one of the tasks that we have, right? In the data team to solve.
And how kind of in practice is that done, or rather, how does data play a role in like the company's strategic decisions here?
Well, it's definitely seen as an enabler, right? So in order to have the sustainable business model, in order to know, like, yes, are we actually like, can we track our business and everything? So data is definitely seen as an enabler. It's in the strategy. So yes, that's what we focus on in order to make sure that we can actually reach our business goals.
And in your role as head of data, what does a typical day look like in the role?
Well, it's high and low, I would say. So it's, I mean, it can go anything from setting sort of the master data strategy to more detail digging into why is this report wrong, and can we sort of get this fix going right now. It's hands-on, but it's also strategic, and I like that. I like being, especially since I've sort of had all of those roles. So I like being everywhere.
Yeah.
And I also think that like understanding the details can sort of like also set the roadmap. Then you can set the roadmap better. Of course, you can't know everything about the details, but sort of setting that roadmap if you actually are in on the ground doing stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And in your role, and also kind of reflecting on previous roles that you've had in other industries, are there kind of challenges, would you say, unique to data management in the construction and infrastructure sector?
Good question. I would say from a data perspective, it's pretty much the same as, I mean, I've been in retail. It's a lot of my career, and I would say like the challenges, they're pretty much the same. I or at least the main challenges. But then I would say it depends more on the size of the company that creates different sort of issues. So if you have a large enterprise, of course, it's more complex, but then you also have more people working on it. But then in a smaller company, you also have, it's easier, but it's also, you have less people working on the topic. So.
Yeah, and to talk a little bit more about the challenges of data management, I'd love to kind of get insight into kind of, your role and how you see the challenges at a company like yours as well. Because I think many companies today kind of obviously understand or want to understand the importance of data, but struggle with execution. So lots are kind of saying, this is, data is absolutely critical to business success, but only a handful of those, or a kind of a relatively small proportion of them are kind of saying, we've kind of successfully created this data-driven culture. Why do you think there's still such a wide gap between kind of recognizing the importance of data and actually kind of embedding it into daily operations?
That's a really good question, right? I like that question. But I think, well, there's so many layers. But I would say like everyone wants to be data driven. Everyone wants the data to sort of like, because we sort of realize that, as you say, right? We know that this is what we should be doing. But then connecting that down to like, okay, so what do I need to do daily in order to get there? That's the hard part, really. And I also see that sort of like a big problem is that like, even if you have, for example, you have a report that you follow that you want to be data driven, and then you have the data quality issues.
Yeah.
And it's not the same person that sees the problem and has the problem that can fix the problem, right? So that's a different department. And how do you sort of like get that incentive into the system, sort of like, so that they actually they want to fix this issue because the other and solve the problem for someone else. And I see that is definitely something that, I mean, that I've seen everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And it becomes so complex because it's not only your department, it's not only your domain. You sort of have to care about everyone else in order to really fix data issues, and that's like, it's an organizational problem as well. So it's,
and you mentioned, I think it's a really good point. You mentioned the person seeing or kind of experiencing the issue is not necessarily the person who's going to be fixing it. This must be a huge kind of hurdle.
yes.
But what other hurdles are there in kind of implementing these effective data management practices?
Well, there are lots of hurdles, I guess. It's also about like the understanding, like, why is it important? Why do we need to do this? Why do we even need to care about it? Again, like, because the risk could be completely somewhere else, or it's on a very high level. And it's not what I do daily, and I don't really care about that. So, and it's someone else's problem. What I do is this other thing. I see that as the main hurdle, but then of course, like, the main problem in data is always people, right? Because it's the silo thinking, it's the silo, and getting people to sort of agree and get together and start working on something together. That's like that's my main task, I would say.
And I think that was actually going to be my a follow-up question here, where essentially, how do you break down these silos? How do you foster collaboration across teams, across departments as well?
My where I have been successful, I'll try many different things. I've created decks. I've talked to C-levels. I've talked to, like, tried from starting from the ground, like, tried everything. But where I've been successful is that where you create a forum where you sort of invite everyone, and being very, very open about it. It's nothing secret. It's nothing, and sort of like getting people involved and getting people talking, right? It's probably, or like, usually it's messy in the beginning, but if you start to understand each other, if you start sort of agreeing on things, that, okay, so this is a customer, this is an item, this is, and then you sort of see each other, and I think that's, I mean, it really creates that feedback loop that doesn't exist in the system today, because you don't normally talk to each other in your daily work. But if you start that, if you have these forums and you discuss these topics, people will start thinking about it, and then they will sort of understand why, and then change happens.
Yeah. And also it kind of opens people up to different perspectives or different areas that they might not even, know so much about, right?
Yes, so, definitely.
Yeah. We were just talking as well about kind of, inviting everyone into like a forum, whether that's a channel, meeting, whatever it might be, to give them kind of a voice and talk about, data issues or whatever it might be. In your opinion, when it comes to non-data personnel and the importance of data across a whole organization, not just within those working with the data, do you have any effective methods or thoughts on how to educate non-data personnel on the importance of data? or even train them to kind of use it?
Yeah. I would actually like to turn the question around if it's okay, because I think that what's also needed, of course, that's needed, but I think what's also needed is that like the data team starts to talk business language, right?
Yes, yeah,
So
for sure.
sort of like it's really both ways. I would say I mean, yes, people need to understand data, but data definitely needs to understand the business, right? And the ultimate way that I see it is that these people are integrated they work in the same team. That would be amazing, right? Because then you would really able to sort of understand each other. Because I think it's really, again, it's a silo problem that sort of like, okay, so we handle data and you handle the business, because business needs data, right? So and in order to really solve business problems, you need to understand the business. So I would say that come together, try to really understand what the business wants, and then try to speak their language when it comes to data, because they understand the business, they understand what needs to happen, and if you just explain it in a way that's not very technical or not very like detailed, then you will probably be able to sort of like get them on board as well. But you have to use their lingo.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a really, really good way of putting it, actually. And I think it then becomes far easier to kind of see it as this kind of shared responsibility, right? As opposed to it's like, oh, it's a technical function. I'm not going to touch it. Do you see the also like evolving regulations, like the AI Act in the EU, for example? Do you see this kind of influencing how organizations both like approach both data management and also the AI adoption?
Yeah, for sure. Right. It's I mean, data management has always been important, but now it's more important than ever, right? Because everyone wants to do AI, and your data needs to be ready, right? And but it's also sort of like the consequence if you don't get it right is much larger if you put it in AI than if you just put it in a report. So so I think the need and the want is definitely higher today than it was like 2 years ago, I would say. So and I think also the realization, like in many companies right now, that okay, so we also need to invest in it. Not only like okay, we want it, but they start to see like okay, so we also need to invest in it in order to actually make it happen as well.
And do you think it to some degree kind of stifles in innovation, or how can you as a company ensure compliance with this kind of regulation that's set without kind of stifling innovation? Because a lot of people see these as being at odds, right? We want to be really innovative, but we're kind of held back by this regulation, but the regulation is super important as well.
Yeah. I think if you handle it correctly, I mean, the way I see like these regulations, of course, yes, okay, in sometimes it can sort of like hold you back, but if you do it correctly and you just sort of follow it and you know, it's more about like okay, so you have your things straight, right? You know what you put in, you know what you that you need to. If you've done your homework and the foundation, then it's not gonna stop you. So make sure that you get the foundation correct so that you can be innovate and sort of like just do it instead of like holding you back.
Yeah. And we'll talk more about AI and automation shortly, but I want to talk a little bit and get your take on hiring and developing data teams as well, because I mean, not surprisingly, for us at least, the demand for data engineers or data professionals has been growing, significantly year over year. But hiring great data talent is, I think, can be a major challenge for a lot of companies today still. And I think companies are increasingly looking for these kind of hybrid profiles, like by which I mean like technical people, but also with this kind of an understanding of business strategy. How's it kind of looking at Adapteo? Do you find it harder to hire for pure technical expertise or for that kind of blend of business savvy data professionals?
I would say that, I mean, for me, as you put it, like for me, the most important thing is that you understand the business and you have these sort of like what you call soft skills, right? Can you communicate? Can you sort of like, can you understand? Can you listen? Can you sort of, and then sort of translate it? Of course, it is important with the technical knowledge, but then like really putting emphasis on getting to know the business, understand, and sort of like, so if I hire, I would say that sort of, if you show that sort of skill and you're little bit less on the technical side, I think that's fine. But the other way around, like if you can't really communicate and you can't like tell the story about the data, like if you only talk from in the technical term, it's not going to create any value, right? Because it's you then it's just like pushing data back and forth, and that's like how do you articulate that if you can't like communicate that? So for me, that is more important than technical skills. If you're curious enough, you're going to learn that. So for me, that's how I see it.
Yeah, maybe on balance a little easier to kind of train or educate on the harder skills.
Exactly.
So you would prioritize like the softer skills over the hard skills if you were to.
If I had to, but then of course, I mean, it's nice if you know all the technical stuff as well. I mean, that's I mean, you need to know it, but
and when it comes to hiring as well, there's such a kind of this growing demand for data roles. Do you think companies, or is Adapteo doing it, and do you think companies should be looking to invest more in internal or like training internal talent rather than always hiring externally, or is this purely dependent on the role?
Well, again, right? Since I am a big fan of knowing your business, I mean, if you can find internal personnel who wants to learn more about data, I think that's the best. Because then you bring in like a lot of knowledge from the business, and that's also super hard to learn from a data team, especially since you usually are kind of isolated from the business. You sit in your silo when you focus on data, and of course you learn things, but you don't really know what's important. Like how do we actually make money? How do we actually sort of like what are the problems that we see? I've seen people that moved from business to data and as product managers and those sort of roles, and they bring a huge amount of value, right? Because they know how we should steer the data. They know, and they just know it in without having to teach them. And then, of course, if you back them up with having like good technical knowledge, the rest of the people have that, right? So I think that's a really good strategy of the win.
And what advice would you give to professionals looking to move into data engineering or even into data leadership positions like yours?
Well, I think stay curious and sort of like, because I don't know if I'm a good role model here. I sort of like I never wanted to sort of be head of data. That was never my aim. It was more of like, okay, I want to solve data. I want to solve this now. I want to make sure that it works, and that sort of moved me there. But that has always sort of like been my goal. And I think like find your inner goal and then you sort of like see where it takes you. That has been how I have approached it. I don't know if it works like that for everyone, but for me, that has been how I sort of approached it.
But I think you mentioned it again, kind of, you want to solve data. I think it's a really actually interesting, like quite a beautiful way of looking at data. We mentioned before, is it solvable? Where are you on that journey?
Yes.
If I kind of just question it like that, you know.
Well, that's the thing, right? I'm sort of I never managed to solve it completely in any role that I have, because there are always these issues. but I do try. I mean, the more time you spend in it, the more things you sort of see that needs to happen. And I would say that like right now, my latest focus has been on like, okay, so how do we use sort of like systems thinking in data? Because I think a lot of solutions could be actually applied within data from systems thinking. And not really like, I don't know if it's the solution, but it's another one of those that I'm sort of have to try. Do we see, can we sort of like move it to something better by also integrating other sorts of thinking? Like, how can we use lean in data? How can we use systems thinking? How can we use domain driven design? How can we use all of these, like, because I think in order to solve data, I mean, we've been trying to do this for so many years, and I think we need to be influenced by other ways of thinking in order to really solve data.
And to talk a bit about applying data in real world projects, what are you able to kind of talk about the biggest challenges that you face in putting data into action in real world projects at Adapteo, or even in previous roles? What kind of any data management issues you've encountered, and how your teams kind of worked through them?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the things that I think has been a common problem is that people lack trust in data. I think that's sort of like because they have experienced it being wrong so many times, or at least from their experience, or like how they view the data that is wrong. And I think that has been very, very common, right? So can I actually trust the data in this report? And you sort of see that if it over and over and over again turns out that no, you're wrong, this is wrong, the data is wrong, and then people start like dismissing the data and sort of go on gut feeling instead. And how do you like approach it? How do you like build up that trust again? And that's something that I've seen that I've done several times actually. Like how do we move from being not trusted to being a trusted partner? And I see that that's where I like to start is that you start case by case, right? So you have one case, you work with a couple of stakeholders, and you sort of see, okay, so what problems do we have? What are the issues? And mostly it's not about like the data being wrong. It's about the definitions are differently, or like but this is because we have this changed, and we said that we were going to change it, but like we also maybe the communication didn't really work, and so setting those sort of like cases, and then you work from there and you sort of build up the trust from there. I think that has been where I have succeeded the most. And really sort of like, and again, like really working closely with the stakeholders to and really see them in the issues that they have. Then the trust sort of builds, and then the reputation sort of spreads as well. Like, okay, so but they really try to help us, and they are a partner now. So I think that is one of the one thing that I've done when it comes to that.
And that can't be any kind of easy task, because I mean, trust. If trust is eroded, right, it can be so hard to rebuild.
It is. It is. It's super hard, right? Because you're working like from. I mean, you have to, especially if you come in new, right? So you sort of have this luggage that you sort of have to take on and go through in order to even get to like a normal, like a neutral sort of feeling. So yeah, that's tricky.
Yeah. And to go back onto the point of kind of AI and automation as well, because, well, obviously we have to talk a little bit about it. Obviously, it's becoming more and more prevalent throughout, all businesses, all industries. How is Adapteo leveraging AI in its processes, or whatever it might be, data initiatives?
Well, of course, we're experienced. We're trying to do POCs and trying to see like how can we use AI, right? So it's very much an experimentation phase, I would say. But it's also a fun phase. Like, what can we do? What can we not do? What can we sort of like see? I mean, where do we actually have the cases that will really build up to this value? We haven't really. So yeah, we're in that phase, I would say. But then again, it's also about like, okay, so but then we need the data in order to be correct, in order to use it. It goes very much hand in hand in seeing like, okay, so what data do we need in order to get the AI right, and where can we actually use the AI in order to improve as well. So it's that loop happening right now, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting because obviously more and more companies are embedding AI into operational processes. But you mentioned a point of kind of having the data right, and many of these companies are struggling with the point like being deploy ready, and this might be down to not having access to data or data quality issues. You mentioned the point of data quality before as well, and you also just mentioned that you're in this kind of experimenting phase. Do you see AI today as something that maybe not so much within your company specifically, but more generally as something that's ready or fully ready to kind of drive business decisions today? Or are we still in a phase of making sure the data kind of foundations are strong enough first?
Well, I think a lot of companies, I mean, I've been at before this, I was a consultant, right? So I was a lot of different, I think, I mean, a lot of companies are still struggling with this data foundation and like, and data management and the data governance. How do we actually steer it, and how do we actually define this, like the metadata and ontology or semantic layer, whatever you want to call it. Like all of those things is that since a lot of people have sort of not really invested and really managed to really get there, I think putting AI on top of this, of course, a lot of people are going to struggle because you still you don't have that sort of foundation. And but then again, of course, there are cases where you can use AI without having that. So it's not like it's everything needs to be ready in order to get value from AI. That's not true. But in order to really drive business decision and really make sure that you get it right, I think a lot of people or a lot of companies are still struggling with that.
Yeah, I can agree. And have you, in your role or in previous roles as well, have you kind of experienced this where you've maybe had to kind of, a lot of people are like, oh, we need to test this, we need to do this, we're going to use AI here. And you've had to kind of push back and say, look, no, we don't have, this would be dangerous. We're not going to get, or the value that you're expecting is not going to be as high.
Yeah, I definitely see cases where it's like
because these are kind of stakeholders, let's face it, that are kind of assuming that, we can do something, but not maybe understanding why it can't be done when you look at it on a data kind of level.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, for sure. But what I've seen a lot of cases is like people want to use AI, but maybe you don't need an AI. Maybe you just need a report, right? Or you just need like normal like ML, or you like so you don't need an LLM in order to solve this problem. It's more like you take the sledgehammer when you actually just need a screwdriver, right? So it's because it's such a hype that we need to use Gen AI in order to solve all our problems, but maybe that's not the best solution. And that's the problem when it's in this hype cycle, right? Because everyone is talking about it and we want to do so much, but again, like what creates value, what is actually good for our business? I think that's. But I sort of look forward to where it's not in this hype anymore, and we're more in this sort of like, okay, so this is how we do it. This is this is the way we approach this sort of topic. But right now, I would say we're still in the hype cycle.
Yeah. And Yeah, I think that kind of brings me to one of the last kind of sections here, when we look into the future, basically. Because I'm keen to kind of hear what you're excited about. I mean, if you're to like look ahead, what emerging trends or technologies in data management, in AI, in sustainability, obviously, which is important to Adapteo. What do you find it particularly exciting at the moment?
Ooh, good question. Well, since I'm a data nerd, I would say I'm really excited about like how can we move from being the centralized. How do we actually decentralize data? How do we make sure that everyone can sort of um, get data, get access to the data that of course they can get access to, but then but how do we make it accessible and ready and make sure that it can be used by both AI agents or like normal BI cases or whatever, but how do we make sure that anyone can sort of create value from data? And I think that's sort of, I see that that can definitely happen. Of course, a lot of people are struggling with this, but I do see that, okay, so we are moving, we are getting there, we are seeing solutions coming up in the market.
Is there any tool or technology in particular that you're
Well,
really excited about here?
one of the like one of the problems when you decentralize data is like, okay, so how do we give access to it? For example, that's one of the problems, right? So how do we give access to how do we ensure that all of these people that have this that they follow all these policies that we have, and we have lots of privacy policies, like how can we ensure that happens? But then there are tools on the market now that they can sort of like scan them and sort of give recommendation and see that, okay, so according to this purpose and this person's belonging in the organization, you should probably give access or you should not give access here. And that's sort of like one problem that needs to be solved, but I see that sort of happening. And I think if we can move there and like getting people, giving people access to the data and being able to sort of like decentralize that, I see, especially in large enterprises, that would create so much value. And I see that it's on its way to happen.
Yeah, I think it's a super interesting point as well, because with the companies that I've kind of worked with as well, you see oftentimes less like becoming less and less like this, but these kind of data insights are in the hands of a few, right?
Yeah.
And these
Yes.
people are so powerful in that sense, right?
Yes.
That it's kind of like, how can you say, okay, well, anyone across any kind of function can find this data, they know where to get it, they know how to extract it, not necessarily by querying or whatever. They maybe in the future can use natural language and
Yes.
everything, and then how can they interpret it as well?
Yeah.
And I think this is going to be really a game changer for all the companies, because like I said, it's it has been before in the hands of a few, right?
Yeah. And that's what we want to change, right? So we want it to be equal. Everyone should have access.
And where do you see, particularly for Adapteo, where do you see the most potential for innovation at the moment or moving forward?
Oh, it's a good question. I think like we still need to sort of like build that sort of data foundation in order to like sort of like really again, right? So we see like we have AI use cases, but in order to get there, we need the data, and then sort of like so we're still in that phase. But of course, I mean, AI coming in, like AI agents, sort of like moving into taking parts of different like. I actually see the most value in getting AI to do the boring stuff, right? Because that's really it takes a lot of time. No one wants to do it, and it's just like those like soul crushing tasks that needs to happen. But it also will create a lot of value because it creates structure. It creates like one way of doing it. You have to define it and really like in order to automate a process, right? And then we can focus on more. Then we like the humans within the company can really like make sure that, okay, so how do we innovate? How do we sort of like that's where I see the most value.
Yeah. Yeah, I could agree, and they then get to focus on the fun stuff, right? The
Yes.
more motivating stuff.
Yes.
And yeah, one final question from me: if you had to think a few years ahead, scary to do so nowadays, I know, but if you were to, what do you believe will define truly successful data-driven organizations?
Good question. Well, getting to a point where data is more integrated within business, like really make sure that you do have sort of data and business together. That's where I see like it's not even like it's not the silo. It's actually moved into business, and it's so natural that you work like hand in hand in achieving, like, okay, so you want to achieve this business goal, right? We need data, we need process, we need like everything, like we need to know, talk to the customer, or whatever you need to do. But data is just one of the things. It's not something that happens outside. I think that's like, if we can get there, I think that is probably going to create a really data-driven organization.
Fantastic. And before I wrap up here, Karin, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think we talked about some really interesting stuff here. But no, I think I'm okay.
Nice. Yeah, I agree. I think it's been a really, really interesting, really nice conversation. Talked a lot about data management, team building, importance of fostering that data-driven culture, right? So thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing your insights.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. And for those who want to learn more about Karin's work, be sure to check out Adapteo at adapteo.com. And if you like this episode, don't forget to follow, leave a review, and stay tuned for more conversations on data, tech, and innovation. Until next time, keep innovating, keep on building. We'll see you soon.